Yo fam, what is up? My name is Sixy. In my recommended videos on YouTube the other day, both Growl and Max had videos that were recommended to me of their Dragonflight alpha gameplay, specifically their Evoker class. They had this really funny moment where they ended up boosting each other up over this wall, and it was kind of a hee-hee-tee-hee moment. And after laughing at it, I realized, hey, this is kind of a problem. Now, as you can see, this is fairly innocuous. They skipped a wall. Who cares? I don't think this is groundbreaking. However, I think when players that are new to the game or less experienced see things like this, they start making comments like, oh, we're just playing beta for Azeroth, or Blizzard's a multi-dollar company, or you know, we've all heard these comments before. It definitely sucks. Now, you might be saying to yourself, Sixy, this is alpha gameplay, you fucking knob. And I would say to you, shut up, like and subscribe. Thanks, appreciate it. No, but really, I think that the issue arises not in what's going to come, but in what already exists when implementing in this new class with current content. Now, you might be saying like, oh, well, it'll all be new content in Dragonflight. I would beg to argue with you that we are approaching Season 4 in just a couple of days. And this is an experimental season where we are going to see Warlords of Draenor dungeons in the main rotation, as well as Legion dungeons and BFA dungeons. Now, if this is something that ends up going well, and the player base sees a lot more of these old dungeons coming into play, what we're going to see is that there was a lot of game-breaking exploits back in the day that never really got addressed. And once you start adding in a class that can do things that are very similar to what a Demon Hunter can do, and now you have a tank, a healer, and a DPS that can all do crazy Demon Hunter shit, you're going to see a game that looks very sloppy and unpolished. So what I want to do is show you guys some of these examples and some of these aspects, and why this could be very problematic as we move forward if Blizzard doesn't find a way to be vigilant and go back through either all of this content or have a much quicker turnaround rate. There are exploits in this game that lasted an entire season, and some of them lasted an entire expansion. So let's take a look at some of those examples. A very great example of this is in Adel-Dazar. We all remember the snapping points in AD, and some of them got really, really out of hand. Some were Demon Hunter only, some were like, you can do this crazy thing or that crazy thing, but the reality is that it created this huge skill gap for something that didn't really seem like it should have been in the game. While looking up some of these problems, I saw an MDI poll where they were able to pull and snap a ton of mobs down onto Razan specifically, and I just thought to myself, this is kind of silly. Like, why even bother putting these mobs into the game or these mechanics into the game if they're just going to be cheesed and pulled onto the boss? Like, this should really be addressed. It makes the game look stupid. For me personally, it was great to learn the snapping points and to see how those interacted with the game. I really enjoyed that aspect of the game, but also it looks dumb. It just makes the game look not polished. So not only did I think like, oh, hey, well, I don't want to go back to the days of snapping. I started thinking to myself, how many other problems were there? And Blizzard attempted to address snapping specifically in Shadowlands, but they didn't actually do it. I remembered after researching this that I was able to actually break things in both Spires of Ascension by double jumping as a Demon Hunter on top of this statue here right next to the third boss. And we were able to recreate some of this. Now, how applicable that might be is another question for debate, but I was able to physically snap mobs up onto this statue. And at first, when you first snap them, they don't even attack you. So this was something that easily could have been exploited throughout the entirety of Shadowlands, that because of the nature of the mobs, I think that just never ended up happening. But more specifically, and I don't know how well known this is, you can do this in Necrotic Wake. Now, I've always, to this day, surprised people when I jump up onto this little ledge here to sometimes repair my gear or something like that. But if you go behind this little tooth here and then pull some of these mobs, they'll actually snap up here. Which, as if you've ever tried to pull the entire Necropolis section, you know can be a pain in the ass because of the casters and just various aspects. But a lot of this ends up getting alleviated if you use the snap spot. Now, I went back into the dungeons as far back as Legion to see using the Evoker class in a way that people or Blizzard specifically didn't think about. And this is ultimately what what my problem is, and ultimately what I'm trying to portray to everyone, is that there's a lot of instances in this game where people just don't remember that this used to be broken or still is broken. So not only can you have a Demon Hunter tank, you could also have an Evoker healer and an Evoker DPS. Suddenly it's very easy to ferry an entire group into places they otherwise wouldn't have been able to be done. And the reality is that Blizzard can't keep up with a majority of these problems and exploits and bugs. In fact, I went back today to King's Rest and was looking up an old exploit that used to be in the game where you could Demon Hunter double dash over a wall to pull the final boss in King's Rest. You would reset him, and then the gate would open up, and you can avoid a very tricky and deadly mob, little mini boss in King's Rest right before that. Now, this was huge because this was one of the limiting factors in people pushing the next best key in King's Rest. And then it turns out I found this little gem. And I went today to test to see if this had ever been resolved. But basically, you as a Demon Hunter can teleport completely outside of the King's Rest instance map into some other section of the world and float. Like, basically, once you start climbing around, you float back into the dungeon and then start at the third boss. But these are things that you have to think, like, that Blizzard now has to think about. Like, are these things in the game that haven't been resolved broken? For example, in Eye of Ashara, back in Legion, there used to be a skip to go from the section of the map where the fourth boss is, Ashara, to the third boss, so that you can skip a lot of the Murlocs and some of these more annoying pulls. And the fix for it at the time was a swap blaster. Now, Demon Hunters were still capable of doing it. There was a trick with using a mount that had multiple spots where people could sit in the mount, and that was still viable, but now you don't have to. Eye of Ashara is in the current rotation if it's a Legion time walking event. So this can now be re-exploited as an Evoker to quickly ferry up an entire group to avoid this entire problematic section of the dungeon. Now, if this is what Blizzard wants, I don't have a problem with it. For me, it's fun, but I think that from the casual player's perspective, it just looks dumb. It looks dirty. It looks like Blizzard didn't put any time or effort into their game, and it leaves a bad taste in their mouth. They're more likely to go back to Final Fantasy or any other game, one that feels like it has a lot more polish, that doesn't have these things where, like, oh, I need to know this obscure reference in order to beat the dungeon. I mean, for me specifically, when I switched from doing push keys to carry keys, and granted I was doing double carries, Adel-Dazar became one of the worst dungeons ever. I had the lowest time rate for doing double carries in Season 4 of Adel-Dazar, and that's because simply the skill gap for snapping the mobs was too high. I couldn't get two newer players to be able to do what was necessary to utilize these snaps. But as a result, they kept shortening and shortening and shortening Adel-Dazar's overall dungeon timer length. It made it impossible, near impossible, to time these keys, and definitely made for a worse experience for me as a player. And I'm certain for people that were struggling to get their KSM done or any of these other things back in Season 4, it was brutal for them as well. Especially with, like, newer players who have less experience in the game, they see some of these broken mechanics that the top 1% are capable of doing, and then they think to themselves they either need to do that and they ruin people's keys or other players' experiences, or simply they just can't do it. And I just don't know that Blizzard has the resources or the time or the ability to plan for every single one of these potential outcomes. Now, I don't want them to take these abilities away in the game. I need to make that crystal clear. But I do think that, like, when you implement mechanics like this that are class specific, a lot more time and effort needs to be put in to think of all the different ways where it can really make your game look, you know, less than polished. This is just food for thought. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope that we shed some light on this topic. I think that it's imperative that if Blizzard leaves this in the game as is, that they really do their due diligence and find all these little aspects and places that can potentially be problematic and take away from the experience of the casuals. And I think in general, for the health of the game, it's important that these people are here and having a good time and think the game is good and worth their money so that they can continue to play. That's all for today. I hope you guys have a good one. See you out there in the streets. Peace.